Everybody. So this is our first segment video, podcast video, whatever you want to call it. I thought I would start with baseball and something that had been in the news the last few years in relation to the Montreal market. And while there was a lot of momentum and a lot of excitement and a lot of hope and a lot of good people involved, ultimately, it doesn't look like baseball is going to return to Montreal full-time or anytime. And so in order to unpack what exactly happened, why it happened, we can start at the beginning of the groundswell to bring it back. And there were a lot of different factors to it, certainly. One of them was, I think you can trace it all the way back to 2010 and the induction of Andre Dawson into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And that got people here in Montreal kind of excited and looking forward to that ceremony and having the Expos name back in the limelight and the spotlight. And it carried over into former teammate of Dawson and Expos player Warren Cromartie, getting people excited about it, having conversations with different people in the city, and full marks and full credit to him for getting that conversation started. The passing of Gary Carter a couple of years later also galvanized people and kind of brought up the nostalgia and the love of the heyday of the Expos, which you could argue is the late 70s, early 80s. And then, my group, ExposNation, myself, Anakin Slade, and a host of others that helped along the way, including Derek Aucoin, we decided that it was necessary to start doing some grassroots events. So in 2012, we brought a couple hundred people to a Blue Jays game in Toronto. 2013 was much higher scale. We had 1,000 people at a Blue Jays game in July of 2013. That got the attention of the Prime Minister at the time and the opposition leader and ESPN, the magazine. And fast forward to the fall of 2013, and Evenco, locally in Montreal, announced that in the spring of 2014, preseason baseball games would start happening in Montreal. And a lot of people thought that this was perhaps a litmus test, a precursor to serious conversations for baseball returning to Montreal. And for a while, it looked like that, whether it was the Jays hosting the Mets the first year or Cincinnati or Boston. The crowds, when it was a weekend games, not towards the end of that promotion with Pittsburgh, and Monday, Tuesday nights are certainly tougher, and they still got over 20,000 both games. But it started to look like we were headed in the right direction at the time. The mayor was Denny Coderre, a huge baseball fan. Pedro Martinez was here with the Red Sox and imploring baseball and Montreal to get a team. John McHale Jr. from the commissioner's office, of course, the son of the first president of the Montreal Expos organization in 1969, was very bullish on the market. And so there was a lot of hope, a lot of excitement around it. And the events continued, the grassroots things. Enrollment was up in Baseball Quebec, and that was very exciting from a local perspective. There was coverage across the country, and it wasn't a Montreal team. It was a regional team back in the day. You had buses coming up from Plattsburgh and Burlington, and people coming in from Ottawa, and maybe once a year trips from the Maritimes and the Prairies and Western Quebec, because prior to the Blue Jays, certainly the Expos were, across the country, and the Blue Jays with territorial rights really kind of put the kibosh in that and really hurt the Expos in that sense. And, we're not here to relitigate what happened between 69 and 2004, but it's really a summary of what was happening in the last few years. Well, at some point, some local owners and people stepped up. First, it was the Montreal Chamber of Commerce, and then Stephen Bronfman, of course, the son of the founder of the Montreal Expos, he got involved along with a consortium, which is a bad word here in Montreal, certainly thinking about the Claude Brochu years. But he brought in some really passionate baseball fans. And I think that's where the excitement came from. Alain Bouchard of Couche-Tard founder fame, Mitch Garber, of course, Eric Boyko of Stingray Digital. He was a big baseball fan. And I had a chance to talk to all of these folks along the way, even if for a few minutes here or there. And you could tell that the intentions were real, but the economics on the other side were not all that favorable. Of course, the Canadian dollar issue, the Blue Jays are a different entity, right? Because they're owned by Rogers. And when you have a telecommunications company owning you that has a need for content, it's a different economic model. It's a different revenue model. They have the Blue Jays on 162 days a year on their channels. They have the Blue Jays for 30-minute summaries of games as well to provide additional content. They have a lot of different offshoots of that, pregame, postgame shows, all these things. It feeds their Sportsnet news and all that stuff. So in Montreal, while the intentions were good, the economics of building a stadium, getting buy-in from local governments, and then trying to sell 81 home games at the astronomical prices that we were looking at was not going to be the same. You weren't going to get $5 tickets and $1 hot dogs anymore. People had to shed nostalgia in favor of reality. And I don't think that ever really fully happened for passionate baseball fans here for the following. So when they assess the market here locally, and we should also point out that in addition to Stephen Bronfman as the figurehead of this group trying to get baseball back, you had William Yeager and Ernst & Young working on the file. You had Richard Epstein and the law firm BCF working on the file. You had some well-established professionals and entities from a legal, from an accounting perspective, real estate perspective. They were all involved. And it was a really, really good, solid team. Now, what happened in terms of the next steps? Well, at some point, of course, we all knew the plight of the Tampa Bay Rays, right? And Stu Sternberg, the owner, I believe of hedge fund background and fame. And he was trying to get a stadium done. Same kind of situation as what happened with the Olympic Stadium in Montreal. You had the Tropicana Field, which was over a bridge, indoors, not a nice looking building, not downtown Tampa Bay. It was in St. Petersburg. A lot of obstacles to really get the attendance up. The other thing, too, which compounded that was the fact that Tampa Bay is always historically a spring training town and a Yankees town. So to ask people to shed the Yankees and follow another team in that same division, kind of tough outside of pennant races and stuff like that. So at some point, there was a meeting of the minds, and whether it was an initial conversation of, hey, let's move the team to Montreal, I don't know if those were the initial talks. Perhaps it sounds like that's what it was. But, Sternberg was steadfast in saying that, look, Tampa Bay is a big TV market. There's a revenue stream here, and I'm not giving that up. Now, what if we think outside the box here and maybe try a split city idea? You build a stadium, I build a stadium. We get Canadian TV rights, Tampa TV rights. It's too hot here in the summer for an outdoor stadium, so let's play those games in Montreal. It's too cold in Montreal in the spring. Let's play those games here in Tampa. We'll build a new spring training facility. The players will not have 3 moves. They'll have 2. They'll come to spring training in January, February, March, and they'll be there for the stadium in April, May, part of June. Then they move up north. And it's almost like school is out anyway for players with families. They come up to Montreal for the summer, rest of June, July, August, September, certainly. And then I don't know about playoffs, but that was the plan. And a lot of people here in Montreal said, no, I don't want if it's half a team, I don't want it. I don't understand that. Were you going to go to all 81 home games if it was a full-time team here? No, you weren't. So to reject the idea of a split city team in favor of nothing, you would rather nothing, didn't make any sense to me. And maybe you weren't, passionate baseball fans. Maybe you were just Expo fans. And that's okay. But if you were a baseball fan, you couldn't help but get excited about the idea of having a baseball team back here in Montreal. So here we are. And this concept, by all accounts, was floated by Rob Manfred and the Major League Baseball office. And from what I'm told, or have been told, and they've been public about this as well, the commissioner knew all about the split city idea. He was all for it. It was an outside the box, different idea. And, traditionally players come to spring training in Florida, then they go to their home city. Well, this would have been spring training in Florida, stay a little bit longer, and then go to Montreal for the summer. So it wasn't that crazy of an idea. It really wasn't. And the idea of having a couple of different revenue streams, TV-wise, brilliant. 2 markets, brilliant. It likely would have happened. The local group ran with the idea because according to the feasibility studies and all those things that they ran over the years, sure, baseball could work here in Montreal, but half a year, oh my gosh, easy sell. Easy sell. You build a stadium. We all know that there's no outdoor venue here in Montreal for concerts and other large events, right? I mean, U2 had to build their own stadium just to perform here like a decade ago. So it made sense. They earmarked land. I was part of the land consultations with the city. I think it was in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. Land was identified, really the only, the Peel Basin, they call it, really the only parcel of downtown that was still undeveloped. Really the only shot here. Stadium plans were developed. Bronfman and Mitch Garber famously met with Mayor Valerie Plante and seemed to be on the same page with her about things. And, well, you might think, well, what about the province? How are they going to? It's a little known fact that when the preseason Blue Jays games began, the local group that was, trying to get baseball back held, viewing parties at suites at the Olympic Stadium. And guess who was there? Future Premier Francois Legault, chomping on a hot dog, watching baseball. So I have no doubt that if it made fiscal sense in any way, they would have had buy-in from the provincial level. They really would have. We remember in the late 90s, they tried to get a stadium deal done by taxes on players' salaries, essentially getting an advance on that from the government. It's revenue the government wouldn't have had anyway if there was no baseball. So it made a lot of sense. I don't know what the plan was this time around. You'd have to ask, the Bronfman group. I don't know if the talks went that far, but the stars were starting to align. They had a location. They had a stadium plan, potentially. They were looking at all these different types of angles. Meanwhile, over in Tampa Bay, they were mentioning it publicly as well. Yeah, split city idea. We want to start in Tampa Bay. We don't think it's feasible here for 81 home games a year. We think that this is the best idea to alleviate that financial burden, keep Tampa Bay with some baseball to some extent. Now, certainly they were scorching the earth down there, the fans. They were not happy about it. We know that. But the Major League Baseball office was well aware of everything going on. In fact, the local group here in Montreal were filing regular reports with the commissioner's office. So everything was a go. The green light was there. And it was more than just Hamilton of the NHL. In other words, it wasn't a threat. Well, if you don't build me a stadium here in Tampa Bay, I'm not keeping the team here. I'm going to go to Montreal. That wasn't the case. It was already decided. Sternberg had thought about it. He's from New York. Famously, maybe not so famously, he had been up here multiple times. He enjoys the city. It's an hour flight from New York, where he's from. It made a lot of sense. So this thing was moving forward. And it was now a matter of the local group here in Montreal selling the idea of baseball being here half the time. All the details had to be worked out, certainly, but this was something that they were banking on. Otherwise, they would have to buy a team, whether it's an expansion fee or relocating a team, and spend $1 billion, $2 billion plus build a stadium. The economics didn't work. They just did not work. This was the best way, the only way for Montreal feasibly to get Major League Baseball back here in the city. Half a season, forget the Tuesday, April, plus 3 days in an outdoor stadium. Ridiculous. Nobody wants to do that. Those who probably went to Jerry Park could attest to that. And so things were aligned. Things were getting there. Somewhere along the way, perhaps because things were going so well that the train had left the station, it was on the tracks, it was moving. Some of the other owners, according to my research, my discussions with people in the group, their theories. I've also spoken to a senior executive of an MLB team in the National League. When the other owners, who likely would have been on the expansion and relocation committee, when the other owners got wind or started to see, they tolerated this whole thing at the beginning because they thought it was a leverage play for the Tampa Bay market. Oh, yeah, Montreal, sure. They never thought that this would actually happen. So when they said, and remember, the commissioner works for the owners, when these folks, whoever they are, this group of owners, this small group of owners, said to the commissioner, we're not voting for this, this can't happen, the whole thing crumbled. And it's devastating. It's devastating to anybody who loves baseball, to all of the people at Ernst & Young and BCF and Bronfman and Garber and all the people who worked on this file for so many years to advance it to where they got it, which is just remarkable, by the way. The whole thing collapsed and it was devastating. Now, why would the other owners object to it, you might ask? Well, I think it's clear that they looked at Stu Sternberg, who receives revenue sharing money, right? Because he's one of the lower revenue generating teams in Major League Baseball. And they see how competitive he is year after year after year. And they kind of resent it, I would think. So they're paying this guy to beat them, right? So when they look at Sternberg and they say, okay, well, you're going to have the Tampa Bay market rights there, and you're going to get a secondary market. You're going to control 2 different markets, and I only get one, and I have to pay you revenue sharing money because I'm a high payroll and you're not? I don't think so. This was all cute when you were using Montreal as leverage to get a stadium there. Hell, we'll all do it. We've used Vegas. We've used Montreal. We've used other cities. But now that it's actually going to happen and you're going to get a new stadium in Montreal and maybe a new stadium in Tampa Bay, and you're going to get 2 markets to yourself, I don't think so. I do not think so. Not happening, my friends. So that's essentially what happened. I haven't heard or seen or been told anything that refutes this theory, but it's devastating. Look, Major League Baseball wants to be a global sport. They want to grow the game. And back in the Ichiro days, they loved the idea of Seattle essentially becoming Japan's team, right? And they looked at Montreal with the French content and thought, yeah, this is great. Maybe we can expand baseball into Africa with their French broadcast. Maybe it'll expand in France and Belgium and so on. So that's what happened. That's what really happened, and why we don't have baseball here in Montreal. I think at some point the buy-in locally here of only having half a team would have come. Half of something is better than a lot of nothing. And that's what we have here. And I really don't have any faith anytime soon of it ever happening again. Buying a team, the economics of what a team costs now, which is just crazy, and building a stadium. Look, when it was the local group just building the stadium and Sternberg still owning the team, and maybe the Bronfman group would have had a small minority buying in, then perhaps it makes some sense. But 81 games in Montreal, the exchange rate, all that kind of stuff, I just don't see it. Unless the other owners are talked back in to the split city idea, it was just perfect, man. Unless that happens, I think I think it's an idea that's unfortunately passed us all by. So, we'll be content to have our hockey, and who knows if the Alouettes will survive and flourish at some point. And maybe we'll get a National Lacrosse League team back here, and they'll play in Laval. And certainly we have a semi-pro basketball or professional basketball, a couple of leagues here now. But yeah, that's what really happened, folks. We were that close. It was happening. The commissioner loved the idea until he didn't, because he was told not to.